It was a quiet dawn in the mountains, when a farmer noticed something strange moving at the edge of his field. At first, he thought it was just another stray dog, searching for scraps. But as the mist cleared, he froze. It wasn't a dog at all. It was a wild bobcat, and clamped in its jaws was something heavy, dragging awkwardly across the ground. At first, he assumed it was prey, but when the bobcat finally stopped in front of his porch, he realized with a shock it wasn't food. It was something far more unexpected. And what happened next would challenge everything he thought he knew about the wild. The morning after the storm was unusually still. Daniel Hayes, a third-generation farmer living at the edge of the Smoky Mountains, stood on his porch with a half-finished cup of coffee in his hand. His family had worked this land for decades, battling weather, wilderness, and isolation. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to see. Movement caught his eye near the tree line. At first he dismissed it as a stray dog, maybe thrown off course by last night's thunderstorm. But as the fog lifted with the rising sun, his stomach tightened. It wasn't a dog, it was a bobcat. Daniel had seen bobcats before, but always at a distance. They were shy, elusive, and kept to the shadows. But this one wasn't hiding, it was moving toward him, slow, deliberate, and in its jaws, something dangled. Daniel squinted. The animal's spotted coat was slick with rain, muscles straining as it dragged the object across the wet ground. At first, he thought it was carrying prey, but as the bobcat staggered closer, Daniel's heart lurched. It wasn't an animal, it was a sack, a small, waterlogged burlap sack, frayed at the edges. The sight made no sense. Why would a wild predator carry something like that? And why bring it here? Daniel's instincts kicked in. He reached for the old rifle leaning against the porch railing. His father had always warned him, respect the wild, son, but never turn your back on it. Bobcats rarely attacked humans, but an animal acting strangely was unpredictable. Yet as the bobcat reached the bottom step of his porch, Daniel noticed something that made him loosen his grip on the gun. The animal looked exhausted. Its sides heaved with every breath, its ribs visible beneath rain-soaked fur. Its eyes weren't fixed on him, but on the sack it carried. With a soft grunt, the bobcat dropped the bundle onto the wooden steps. Then it just stood there, drenched, trembling, staring at him, as if waiting. Cautiously, Daniel stepped forward. The bobcat didn't retreat. Instead, it lowered its head and released a sound he'd never heard before. Not a growl, not a hiss, something closer to a broken, desperate cry. Daniel's stomach tightened. What on earth was inside that sack? He crouched carefully, keeping one eye on the bobcat. The fabric was torn. Something inside shifted. Something alive. With trembling hands, he pulled the sack open. His breath caught. Inside was a kitten. Not a bobcat kitten. A house kitten. Tiny, soaked, shivering, its eyes barely open, Daniel froze. Why would a wild predator bring a helpless house cat to his doorstep? The little creature gave a weak cry. Daniel's chest clenched. He looked up. The bobcat was still there, shoulders tense, eyes glowing in the mist. Then it made that sound again. The desperate, aching cry. Daniel whispered, barely believing his own words. "You want me to help it, don't you?" The bobcat didn't move, but its stare was answer enough. Daniel bent down slowly, his hand shaking as he lifted the tiny creature from the damp sack. Its fur was plastered flat, body trembling from the cold. The kitten gave a faint broken mew, so small it barely reached his ears. Daniel's throat tightened. "Easy now. I've got you." He wrapped the little one in the sleeve of his flannel shirt, holding it close to his chest. The warmth of his body seemed to stir the kitten, but only just. And then, he heard it again, that strange, low cry. Daniel lifted his eyes. The bobcat stood only a few feet away. Rain dripped from its whiskers, chest rising and falling like bellows. But there was no aggression in its stance, no threat, only something Daniel had never imagined he'd see in the eyes of a wild predator, pleading. The truth hit him hard. This bobcat wasn't here to hunt. It was here to trust. Daniel whispered, barely louder than the rain. "All right, I'll take care of it." As if those words meant something, the bobcat lowered itself onto the porch, curling at the bottom of the steps. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Daniel hurried inside the cabin, closing the door behind him. The little bundle in his arms barely moved. He laid it gently on a folded towel near the fire, rubbing it dry with another cloth. "Come on, little one. Stay with me," he murmured. The kitten stirred faintly. Its tiny tongue flicked when Daniel touched a drop of milk to its lips. Slowly, shakily, it swallowed. Relief washed over him. It was fragile, but alive. A sudden sound made him jump. The door. He turned. Through the window he could see her, the bobcat, still there, her silhouette against the porch, ears pricked, tail twitching, eyes glowing in the dim firelight. Daniel's heart pounded. Most men would have run her off by now. Most would have grabbed their gun. But Daniel didn't move. Something deep in his bones told him this wasn't an accident. This bobcat had chosen him. Chosen to hand over something it valued more than its own life. He opened the door slowly. The bobcat didn't snarl. She didn't flinch. She just made that sound again. That strange, broken cry. Daniel stepped onto the porch, towel still in his hands. "It's all right. The kitten's safe now. I've got it." For a long moment, the bobcat's eyes burned into his. Then she blinked slowly, lowered her head, and turned. With stiff, tired movements, she padded back into the mist, disappearing into the trees. Daniel let out the breath he'd been holding. He looked back at the kitten by the fire. Its breathing was still shallow, but steadier than before. Something inside him shifted. This wasn't just chance. It was the beginning of a story he would never forget. The storm clouds thinned by morning. Pale light spread across the valley, revealing a world washed clean but broken. Daniel hadn't slept. He spent the night sitting by the fire, keeping watch over the kitten. Every so often it stirred, giving a weak cry or stretching a tiny paw. Each sound filled him with relief. But every time his eyes drifted to the porch, his chest tightened. He could still see her there. The wild mother, standing in the rain. Her amber eyes filled with something he could only describe as trust. By sunrise, Daniel knew he couldn't do this alone. He reached for the old rotary phone on the wall. The line crackled, and after a few rings, a voice answered. Dr. Evelyn Grant. Daniel almost sagged with relief. Evelyn wasn't just the county vet. She was an old family friend, someone who had spent her life rescuing wildlife. "Evelyn, it's Daniel. I've got something unusual here." Her tone sharpened. "Unusual how?" Daniel looked at the kitten curled on the towel, then toward the porch where the bobcat had stood. "You'd better come see for yourself." By mid-morning, Evelyn's Jeep rattled up the gravel drive. She stepped out, gray-streaked hair tucked beneath a cap, eyes sharp with curiosity. "You sounded shaken on the phone," she said. Daniel simply motioned her inside. "Wait until you see this." Evelyn knelt by the fire, lifting the kitten gently. Her practiced hands checked its breathing, its tiny paws. She frowned. "Malnourished. Cold. But it can make it. Lucky you found it. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't find it, Evelyn." She glanced up. "Then how?" Daniel hesitated. Then he said the words out loud, and even to him they sounded impossible. "A bobcat brought it to me." Evelyn blinked. For a moment she thought he was joking, but when she saw his face, her expression shifted. "Daniel, are you telling me a wild bobcat carried a house kitten to your porch?" He nodded. "I saw it myself. She was exhausted, thin, but she didn't run. She dropped the kitten right there. And I swear, Evelyn, she wanted me to help." Silence hung in the cabin. Only the fire crackled. Finally, Evelyn sat back, shaking her head. 30 years in rescue. I've never heard of anything like it. Daniel stared into the flames. "Neither have I, but it happened." Her voice softened. "Then this isn't just survival. This is trust. Something rare." They worked side by side for hours. Evelyn mixed formula, feeding the kitten with a dropper. Daniel stoked the fire, keeping the room warm. Every sip the kitten swallowed felt like a small miracle. By the time Evelyn leaned back, the little creature's breathing had steadied. Its body twitched with a spark of stubborn life. But Daniel's thoughts were elsewhere. He kept glancing toward the window, toward the misty tree line. "You're waiting for her, aren't you?" Evelyn asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, the cabin was quiet again. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the dark. Every creak of the porch boards, every brush of wind through the trees, made him wonder if she was still there. The bobcat. The mother who had trusted him with her secret. Daniel kept the lamp burning low and dozed in his chair near the fire. The kitten, now nestled in a shoebox lined with blankets, let out soft, steady breaths. Each sound was a reminder that the tiny life still clung on. Around midnight, a noise stirred him awake. Not the storm this time. Not the wind. A soft scratch. Daniel froze. Slowly, he reached for the lantern and stepped to the door. He cracked it open and looked out into the night. There she was, the bobcat. Thin, weary, her fur still damp from the forest. But this time, she wasn't carrying nothing. Another sack. Daniel's heart skipped. He stepped back as she dragged it to the bottom of the steps. Just like before, she let it fall. Her sides heaved with effort. Then she looked at him with those same desperate, pleading eyes. Daniel whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." But he knew it wasn't a joke. He dropped to his knees and pulled the sack open. His stomach clenched. Inside, 2 more kittens, weak, cold, barely moving. Daniel's hand shook as he lifted them out, wrapping them in the flannel already draped over his shoulders. "Evelyn, I need you back," he muttered to himself. But before he could even stand, the bobcat made that sound again. That strange, broken cry. Daniel's throat tightened. "You can't do it alone, can you?" For a moment, neither of them moved. A man and a wild predator bound by something unexplainable. Trust. Finally, the bobcat turned and slipped into the darkness. Daniel carried the kittens inside, his pulse racing. He set them near the fire, rubbing their tiny bodies with a towel, coaxing the faintest mews from their mouths. One stirred weakly. The other barely breathed. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Don't quit on me now. Not after she trusted me with you." The night blurred into frantic minutes. He warmed milk, fed them with trembling hands, praying every drop would keep them alive. By dawn, exhaustion pulled at his bones. But when he looked at the box beside the fire, his chest loosened. All 3 kittens were still breathing. Fragile, yes, but alive. The phone rang at first light. Evelyn's voice on the other end was sharp. "Daniel, what happened? You sounded urgent in your message." He exhaled shakily, She came back, Evelyn, with more silence. Then, in a hushed voice, bring them here, to the center. If the mother is trusting you, this might not be the last time she comes. Daniel looked toward the tree line, the mist curling through the pines. No, he whispered. I don't think it is. By mid-morning, Daniel's truck bounced along the gravel road, every pothole jarring the shoebox balanced carefully on the passenger seat. Inside, 3 tiny lives stirred. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sat tucked behind a grove of oaks, a modest building that smelled of pine shavings and antiseptic. Evelyn was already waiting at the door, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp with worry. Daniel carried the box inside like it was made of glass. Evelyn guided him to a warm, quiet room. Together, they placed the kittens under a heat lamp, their fragile bodies wrapped in soft cloth. They're dangerously weak, Evelyn murmured, checking pulses one by one. But they have fight in them. That's something. Daniel rubbed his face, exhaustion heavy in his bones. She brought them to me, Evelyn. Risked everything. Why? Why me? Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Sometimes animals sense things we don't. Maybe she saw something in you, something she could trust. Daniel shook his head. I'm no saint, just a farmer trying to survive another season, but Evelyn only smiled faintly. And yet, here you are, with 3 lives depending on you. For the next 2 days, Daniel drove back and forth between his farm and the center. Each time he arrived, he half expected to see the bobcat waiting by his porch again. Each time, the forest stayed silent. The kittens, though, began to change. Their cries grew louder, their paws stronger. They fought for the bottle with surprising determination. On the 3rd day, Evelyn called Daniel over. Her voice carried a note of excitement he hadn't heard before. They're stabilizing, she said, holding up one of the kittens whose tiny eyes had just started to open. Daniel, they're going to make it. Daniel exhaled deeply, as if he'd been holding his breath for days. Relief swept through him, followed immediately by another thought. What about her? The mother? Evelyn's face softened. If she's still out there, she knows where you live. If she needs you again, she'll come. Daniel looked through the window toward the distant ridge. Shadows stretched across the trees, wild and endless. He whispered almost to himself, Then I'll be ready. That night, sleep finally claimed him. But in the small hours before dawn, a sound woke him. The scratching again. He bolted upright, heart racing, and opened the door. And there she was, the bobcat, weary, limping slightly, her sides hollow from hunger. But this time she carried nothing. She only stood at the porch, staring at him. Daniel swallowed hard. You came back. For a moment, neither moved. Then the bobcat gave that same low cry. Softer now. Almost thankful. And before Daniel could speak again, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Daniel stood in the doorway, the cool air brushing against his face. He felt something deep, something unshakable. This wasn't just chance anymore. This was a bond. Days turned into weeks. The storm-damaged valley slowly healed, but Daniel's world felt forever changed. His mornings were no longer just about tending crops or fixing fences. They began with a drive to the Wildlife Center, where 3 little fighters waited for him. Hope, Ash, Ember. Evelyn had let him choose their names, and Daniel had chosen carefully, each one tied to survival, to fire, to light that refused to die out. The kittens grew stronger, their eyes opened wider, their steps turned from shaky stumbles to playful pounces. Each milestone filled Daniel with a pride he hadn't expected to feel. One evening, as he sat in the playpen with them, Ash clambered up his sleeve, tiny claws snagging the fabric. Daniel chuckled, lifting the little one to his chest. "You've got spirit, don't you? Just like your mother." Evelyn leaned against the doorway, watching quietly. "They've bonded to you," she said softly. "It's rare, Daniel. They know who saved them." Daniel looked down at the 3 sets of curious eyes staring up at him. His voice caught in his throat. "I didn't save them." She did. But as the kittens grew, so did a question Daniel couldn't ignore. Where was their mother now? Every evening he scanned the tree line near his farm. Sometimes he thought he saw her. Just a shadow. Just a flicker of spotted fur vanishing into the undergrowth. But she never came closer. Never brought another bundle. Until one night. The scratching returned. Daniel's heart leapt as he opened the door. There she was again, the Bobcat, framed in moonlight. This time, though, she didn't look exhausted. Her coat glistened, her stance steady. She looked whole. And she wasn't alone. At her side, padding carefully through the grass, were 2 half-grown cubs. Her own. Daniel froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. The wild mother had kept her other litter safe, even through the storm. And now, against every instinct of her species, she was showing them to him. The Bobcat locked eyes with him one last time. No sound this time, no cry. Just a long, steady look. Then, with her cubs close, she turned and melted back into the forest. Daniel stood there, breathless. The meaning sank in slowly. She hadn't just trusted him with the weak. She wanted him to see the strong. The next morning, Daniel drove to the center. The kittens, Hope, Ash, and Ember, tumbled toward him as soon as he entered the room. Their small paws pressed against his hands, their voices loud, insistent. Evelyn smiled knowingly. "Something's changed, hasn't it?" Daniel nodded. His voice was quiet but firm. "She showed me her family." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time to start preparing yours for the wild again." Daniel looked at the 3 kittens nestled around his boots. The thought of letting them go twisted his chest. But deep down, he knew Evelyn was right. They weren't his to keep. They were hers to reclaim. Spring melted into summer. The once frail kittens grew lean and strong. Their paws, once tiny and unsure, now struck the ground with confidence. Daniel visited them every day. He played with them, fed them, even scolded them gently when they got too wild. They were no longer helpless scraps of fur. They were hunters in the making, sharp-eyed, quick, fearless. But with every visit, Daniel felt the same ache pressing deeper in his chest. The day was coming. The day he'd have to say goodbye. Evelyn warned him gently. "They're thriving, Daniel. Too strong to be caged much longer. They need the forest." Daniel nodded, though his throat tightened. "I know. I'm not ready." Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Neither are they. But that's not the point, is it? Wild things don't belong to us. They never did." 2 weeks later, the decision could no longer be delayed. Evelyn arranged for the kittens to be released near Daniel's land, where their mother still roamed. It was the only way to give them a true chance. The day came with a sky painted gold and violet. Daniel drove the rattling truck up the ridge, the shoebox replaced by a sturdy crate now filled with restless, eager bodies. Hope pawed at the bars. Ash hissed, impatient. Ember pressed his nose to the slats, eyes wide with curiosity. Daniel pulled over by the tree line, his hands trembling as he unlatched the crate. "All right, little ones," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's time." The kittens hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then, with sudden bursts of energy, they leapt onto the grass. Tiny bodies stretched, paws meeting earth like it was where they'd belonged all along. Daniel watched, his chest tight as they bounded into the undergrowth. He wanted to call them back, to hold them one last time. But he didn't, because just beyond the trees he saw movement, a shadow, a familiar shape, the mother bobcat. She stepped into the clearing, her amber eyes glowing in the fading light. For a long moment, Daniel and the wildcat faced each other, two guardians of the same family, bound by something wordless. The kittens rushed to her side, nuzzling against her legs, their tiny cries filled with excitement. She lowered her head, grooming each one with slow, deliberate licks. Daniel swallowed hard, his vision blurring. Relief, pride, heartache, all at once. The bobcat looked at him one final time, and in her gaze was no fear, no desperation, only acknowledgement. Then, with her family gathered close, she turned and disappeared into the forest. Daniel stood there long after the trees had swallowed them. The clearing was silent now, but his heart wasn't empty, because he knew the truth. He hadn't just witnessed survival. He had witnessed trust, the kind that bridges the impossible gap between the wild and the human heart. And he knew he would never be the same. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. For the first time in months, Daniel's porch held no scratching sounds. His mornings held no frantic feedings. And his nights, no glowing amber eyes at the edge of the trees. Yet, he didn't feel alone. Every rustle of the forest reminded him. Every distant cry in the night carried a piece of their story. Somewhere out there, hope, ash, and ember were growing, stronger, wilder, exactly as they were meant to be. Sometimes, while mending fences or tending the fields, Daniel would catch himself glancing toward the ridge. And once, just once, he thought he saw her, the bobcat, standing tall in the distance, her silhouette framed against the fading light. No sack this time, no desperate cry, just a steady gaze. Then she vanished, melting back into the forest. Daniel smiled to himself. That was enough. One evening, Evelyn stopped by the farm. They sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the mountains. "You did something remarkable, Daniel," she said quietly. He shook his head. "I didn't do anything." "She did. She trusted me when she didn't have to." "That's the real miracle." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Maybe so. But you chose to honor that trust." And that's just as rare. Daniel stared out at the darkening forest, the memory of amber eyes still etched in his mind. "I'll never forget her," he whispered, "or what she taught me." Evelyn tilted her head. "And what was that?" Daniel's voice was steady now. "That sometimes the wild isn't as far from us as we think. Sometimes it walks right up to your porch, asking for help." The night deepened, stars scattering across the sky. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Outside, the forest pulsed with life unseen. And though Daniel knew he might never see her again, the bond they shared remained, etched forever in memory. A wild bobcat, 3 tiny kittens, and a trust that bridged the space between two worlds. A story of survival, of hope, and of love, carried on 4 small paws into the wild.